Welcome to Recovery Comes Home Radio, your go-to podcast for all things related to addiction recovery. Whether you are an individual in recovery, a concerned loved one, or a dedicated professional, this podcast is tailored just for you. Here we are all about empowering you with the tools, insights, and inspiration you need to move forward. So grab your headphones, tune in, and let's embark on this transformative journey together. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, Recovery Comes Home Radio family, wherever you are. This is Adrienne Ticky, and I'm your host. Today, we have the amazing Julz Vitality, and she is a personal development advocate, helping clients create a snowball effect in their life. She created Positive Impact TV and Self-Mastery Magazine to channel success strategies to her audience, and now she's here to share with us. Julz, welcome.
Thank you so much, Adrienne. This is a true pleasure. This has always been close to my heart, so I'm happy to involve our audience in this discussion and get their minds stimulated, thinking how can they apply what we're going to talk about into their lives.
Yeah, and to be clear right off the bat, we're going to talk about some courageous action that you need to take here, because it's easy when you first get into recovery to be in all of the things and the dreaming and the hoping and the wishing. And really we always talk about the ABCs of recovery. The A, of course, being accept your situation and take action. The B is be brave enough, which is the courageous, to take whatever steps necessary to reach your goal. And then C, create a stellar support system around yourself. So let's talk a little bit about personal development, what it is, how we can improve our own personal development from that intrinsic motivation and not for others' benefit, but really to see that it truly benefits us. And that's how it benefits other people, through us.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I think that the term personal development may mean different things to different people.
Sure.
Right? So other terms that are used are self-improvement, self-help, right? So as long as we're doing something to better ourselves as individuals, in turn, bettering the relationships we're having with the outside world, one person at a time, we are creating a snowball effect. Okay. So it all starts with us. If you can think of going to a grocery store and seeing a lineup of people and looking at their faces, majority of them are probably sad, grumpy, disappointed, angry to be in line. And then your eyes may fall onto a person who's just smiling for no reason. And you're like, what? What's going on in their life? I want to know how they, in this maybe frustrating situation, maybe it's a super long line, they're maintaining their positivity. They're maintaining a positive outlook. We're naturally drawn to take that person out of the crowd and be drawn to them. So wouldn't we want to be that person? Wouldn't we want to work on whatever it is we identify, whether it's healing our traumas, working on maybe some of our mental states? And it doesn't have to be as serious as a depression, clinical depression. It could be just mood swings or sadness or frustration. Maybe we have anger pent up and we just see ourselves freaking out at everybody and everything. We're being triggered, right? So I think the first step in becoming a better individual is, first of all, being aware. What are those things? Maybe be open to feedback. Maybe when you see other people reacting to you in a way like, are you okay? Or why are you overreacting? Overreacting is a good word. I remember hating that word. I'm like, why are you telling me that I'm overreacting? I'm not overreacting. This reaction is fully deserved because, right?
Oh, it's the principle, right? It's the principle of the matter.
Right? But if we become open to growing as a human being, we become open to this feedback, these little hints become an indicator of what it is that we may want to heal. And it's a good thing. It's not a bad thing that you found something to heal. It's like something's been bothering you, and finally the doctor ran a test and diagnosed it and said, here's the pill. So personal development is like that. There's a lot of tools. Everybody should start building their little toolbox, because not all the tools apply to all people. But it's important to keep learning about new tools so that when new situations arise, you come prepared. You're able to handle them without freaking out, without being triggered, without getting angry, without lashing out on someone, and then regretting it, and then going into the guilt trip and the mode, and then going back to your addictions.
Yep.
Right?
And that's what happens.
It all starts with the little things like that. Awareness. Where do you feel your internal pressure rising? Where do you feel frustration? What's constantly rubbing you the wrong way? Maybe it's something as simple as your environment. Maybe you're always tripping over your a door entry reg. Well, replace it. Or maybe you're always scratching your hip on a sharp corner of a table, which I have actually right here. Replace it or put a little cover over it, right? Like
Right.
it's that simple. Start with physical things first that are easy to fix. Then maybe start with relationships. Maybe it's a person that you can literally just set boundaries with. Maybe it's your neighbor who always comes by at the weirdest time and asks you for the wrong thing, and you're like, I'm done with this. So maybe it's just worth a conversation. Hey, listen, boundary. Gently, calmly, without being defensive. Learning how to establish our boundaries is such a fundamental skill. I would suggest anybody who hasn't looked into it, look into it. One of the first books I read when I moved from Soviet Union, from Ukraine to Canada, was The Power of Saying No.
Yeah.
And that talked about boundaries. And I'm like, what the heck are boundaries? Because I was never taught them. I was never shown how to create them, how to respect them. I never had any. My parents never had any. They completely violated any of the logical boundaries that should exist. So when I read that book, I was so empowered.
You understand that's most of our audience is that way.
Yeah.
So I think the personal development went by the wayside because there was this fire in the family called addiction that everybody was trying to put out in their own way or duck and run and hide or however they were trying to stuff that down. Instead of saying, like you said, okay, what can I do? The power is in my hands to choose to work on these things. I don't need to keep banging my head against the wall thinking I will get a different result.
It's not an easy thing. I remember way later after I read the book, I tried to implement it, but we forget things. That's the beauty of having podcasts and shows like this is because we may already know these things that we're going to talk about, but it's a refresher and it makes us think, okay, how can I apply this today? Because maybe the first time I learned about this, I was in a different situation. Maybe it wasn't applicable. So I remember later on, a few years later, I was out with a coworker at lunch and I wanted to order a glass of alcohol. And this gentleman, he was way older than me. He says, you go ahead. I don't drink. What? You don't drink? What's going on? And he told me his little story. And then he says, and he asked me a couple questions. I don't remember how he figured it out, but he realized that I actually was a child of an alcoholic. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, so what? I have control over my liquor. And he brought me a book, Adult Children of Alcoholics.
Yes.
I bawled reading that book because I didn't even realize how much it impacted my life and what patterns it created.
Yes.
And what unhealthy ways of dealing with situations it created. Some of them were people pleasing. It's all around.
People pleasing is huge.
Codependence.
No boundaries.
Enabling, no boundaries. I'm like, oh my goodness, this situation alone explains so much of my life and so many failures in my life, so many failed relationships. And I didn't know how to feel. I didn't know if I should have felt angry at my father for being who he was and to this day is, or it empowered me to finally take charge and start healing, start addressing all these things that came up uninvited completely. I did not want any of that information and awareness into my life at that point. It was scary. It was overwhelming.
Yeah.
And for a lot of our audience, that's what it could be. Sometimes personal development is painful.
Yes. And actually, it's interesting that you bring up Adult Child of Alcoholics because they've actually now renamed their group Adult Child of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families.
Absolutely. Yeah. It applies to narcissism.
Because it applies to narcissism. It applies to so many things. Since COVID 2019, it's not just alcoholism and addiction that are up. It's suicide, it's mental illness, it's domestic violence. These things can play like a tape in our mind. And then we grow up and we replay the tape and don't even realize it. We're playing the tape.
Yeah. It was completely subconscious until it became conscious.
Yeah.
That's why I'm mentioning this book as an example of building awareness.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like, oh, great. Now I'm going to do this and I'm going to be better. No, it was painful. It was painful. Like tragic. I hated my dad. I blamed him for ruining my life. I didn't know what my relationship with him was going to be like. I felt guilty for ruining some of the friendships I did because of not knowing how to deal with people. It was horrific. I went through a lot of roller coaster emotions over years of reading it. And I remember again later when I met my spouse at the time and he was pointing some things out like, you're overreacting. I'm going back to that.
That's a trigger, right?
Right. And I'm like, And then one day I remember we were on a flight and I brought that book with me and I said, you got to read this. A few things. Like I'm like, this explains me. I'm like, I'm not trying to give you an excuse, but at least understand why I'm so messed up. Read that. So it empowers you because it gives you the diagnosis, right? It's just like the doctor would give you the diagnosis, or if you're working with a therapist and then they identify something, they're usually super gentle presenting it to you. It's probably
Yes.
not as drastic as hearing it from a show or somebody's story. When people share their stories, you may just be like, oh my goodness, I see myself in that person.
That's right.
And a lot of my self-healing came from reading books at that time, especially before the internet, before the videos and all of that. I was reading books. Another book I read was something like The Divorce Bible, something like that. A friend of mine recommended that after divorcing that spouse. And it wasn't what it seemed like. I thought it was just going to help me get better. No. We went back to, what was your relationship with your parents? On a scale of 1 to 10, who was supportive, who was least supportive? Now see the patterns between those relationships and your main significant others in your life.
That's right.
And in your career. And I was identifying patterns and again crying my eyes out because that book was literally therapy in the book. And every chapter
and we have a tendency to repeat the traumas.
Yeah. All we know is the patterns we grew up with or we were dealt with, right?
Yeah, you don't think I remember because I come from a complicated family, and that ACOA book is very large, but it describes why you are the way you are, or why I was the way I was, and didn't just leave me there. Oh, just guess well, Adrienne, you're going to be messed up your entire life. It provided a way out by saying, you aren't your parents. You can choose. One of my favorite books is Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And he says that he was a concentration camp survivor and he had to do horrible things. But he said the only thing that wasn't able to be taken away from him was his power to choose in the moment. All of us have bad things that happen to us and areas where we could be better, right? What is it? Because a lot of our residents, they'll get on the bandwagon with you. Yeah, I want to change. I want to change. But when the rubber meets the road, it's too hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Because
what
it's
keeps people going?
Wired. It's the neuron pathways, right?
Right.
Joe Dispenza says what wires together fires together.
Right.
So if we continue repeating certain behaviors or certain thought patterns, they become automatic. They become subconscious. They move from our conscious brain into our subconscious, the operating system. We don't even think about it. So again, awareness, digging into your subconscious, stuff that you buried, stuff you didn't want to remember. Recently, somebody asked me something about my dad, and I was just really trying to remember, really trying. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I cannot remember. Because 3 years ago, my father attacked my second ex-husband, and almost killed him. So with that trauma that threw me into depression and a slew of mental illnesses, I started wanting to forget things. I started moving it out of my mind. So my brain started erasing certain neuron pathways. And now my memory of my father is very selective. So trauma is real. It's not imaginary. Some of it, because it happens in our mind and our brain, it does affect our brain. It does affect our psychological and physiological body. So it's not a joke. And personal development is not 100% cure, but it is something that can help you create awareness, solutions, healthier habits, healthier responses. And most importantly, as a result of every trauma or every situation that I heal from, I usually have an action step or a takeaway that I add into my routines. I created a routine, whether it's a daily, weekly, or monthly, or whenever triggered. What are some of the things I'm going to do? For example, some people turn to breath. Okay, so stress response, okay, slow myself down, take a breath, right? So if you start building these little habits, arsenals of toolkits, you will be a lot more successful dealing with whatever life throws your way next. I interviewed one coach on my podcast. She's a professional anxiety coach, and we created a toolkit on my YouTube channel. That interview, one of the coolest things I remember her sharing was to put a frozen cucumber, slice a cucumber, and put the slices in the freezer. And whenever something happens and you were like caught in a cycle of whatever sort, just take it and start putting it on your face, rubbing it on your face, or even an ice cube. Like that shock of temperature will just interrupt the pattern, right? Pattern interrupt is actually a therapeutic term, right? For breaking a cycle of whatever it is, right? It could be a cycle of anger that is increasing, could be depression, could be anxiety, could be OCD, a lot of things, right? So it's important for you guys to, whenever something does work, remember it.
Yeah, remember it and put it in your toolbox.
Exactly. A notebook, a file, a folder,
and
a
use
box.
it. And remember to use it, because only by using it over and over are you going to get proficient.
Exactly. Yeah. And be open to learning new ones.
I have to ask you, our audience, it seems like personal development comes along later, because when they first get to us, it's a lot of blame and other people's problem. And it's not until they are able to look honestly at their situation, which, as we talked about before, it takes courageous action. It takes open-mindedness and willingness to want to be better and to recognize that power is in your hands. It's personal development. No one else is going to do it for you. Yeah, and it might feel weird at first, right? It might feel weird at first.
It feels weird all the time.
So keep doing it.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, you bring this up because I just today had a conversation with a friend of mine. She's a recovering alcoholic.
Yeah.
And we were talking about relationships, just exchanging voicemails. And she said, her name is also Julia. She said, Jules, I realized that it wasn't just alcohol. I was addicted to a whole bunch of stuff, basically to stimulation, to running away from myself, she said. So she says, I'm finally getting to the point that I'm learning to spend time with myself, love my own company, love my own friendship, and be my best friend.
Yeah.
So this brings me to the point of self-love. So personal development, you pointed inward, self-love. And for those of you for whom that word sounds ridiculous, let's talk about self-worth or self-acceptance. Okay. Do you accept yourself with your flaws, right? You do not have to. Self-love does not mean I'm better than everybody.
No. But it means, to me, it means those of people that have an addictive personality, they don't have a character deficiency. They're not a bad person. They might have made a bad choice or have a hard situation, but you can always get better and redeem yourself.
Yeah. And accepting your past, the mistakes you've made, they are what they are. You cannot change the past. You can't really affect the future other than dream about beautiful things, which I totally encourage. But as you mentioned earlier, you can make a choice what you're going to feel in the moment, how you're going to react at the moment, and the choices you're going to make. So that is self-empowerment, understanding that you are in charge of those three things, that nobody can trigger you if you choose not to get triggered, right? One of the tools that came up as I was saying that, I love sharing this because it helps me a lot, is imagining that you have a bubble around you, but it's not a glass bubble, because glass bubble can break. If somebody throws a rock at it, it will crash. It will shatter.
Shatter, yeah.
So imagine it's made from like that slime that kids play with, okay? So it's a big bubble. You're in it, totally oxygenated. And somebody can just punch it all they want. And the bubble's going to bend, okay? It's going to shake. It's going to move, wiggle, but then it's going to go back in its place. It's always going to return to its shape. So you can choose to remain inside the bubble and not to come out and interact with the abuser, the person that's disrespecting you, whoever's trying to trigger you intentionally or unintentionally, that driver that just cut you off, whoever it is that just provoked you or triggered you or maybe even ignored you. And that's why it's so important to build that bubble. And that bubble, in a way, also contains our inner world, our mirror. How do we see ourselves? Nobody sees themselves as a perfect individual. There's probably nobody out there who can say, I worked on everything. I'm like done with all of the personal development there is. It's a lifelong journey. Even Buddha will say, they'll say it probably, all the Buddhists, they'll say the longer they live, that the more they realize how imperfect they are.
Yeah.
However, they are so much more at peace with that. So
I love have you heard the mantra that before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water.
Interesting. Yeah.
Great. Because we get this personal development because we finally realize that the power to change is within us. See, most people that we deal with, They're looking for external validation. It's intrinsic motivation that does the job.
Yeah. So how do we get to that? How do we build up our intrinsic motivation? That is actually a really good point. And to me, it is closely related to authenticity.
Yes.
Right. And finding out who you are. And for that, you have to spend time with yourself. How uncomfortable is that, especially for those who are
running from themselves.
Exactly.
Yes.
Right.
I mean, in like 3,000 miles in the opposite direction. And then you start realizing that all roads are leading to you.
Yeah. And you only attract a reflection of you. So as you better yourself, you will see that the people that you were struggling with in your close environment are going to fall off and better people are going to come. And as you better yourself, even better people are going to come.
How important is that to surround yourself with other people that are on that same journey?
If we don't, we will get discouraged.
Yeah.
If we don't, we'll feel alone and we will
isolated.
Yeah. We'll follow them. We'll follow whatever they're doing. So if you're trying to quit drinking and all your friends drink, how strong can you be to consistently be going out with those people and not reach out for the glass or say, okay, I'll have a sip, right? Same with smoking, same with gambling, same with porn, right?
Same
porn
with screen addiction.
Because porn nobody can see.
Yeah. Food addiction where you have to eat. Okay. So how hard is it to be addicted to the thing that you need to live? But we've got grown men whose whole families are leaving them because they're downstairs playing Call of Duty with another family, a family that they've created themselves with their real family upstairs.
Yeah. So for those of you who are brave enough, in those moments, take out a piece of paper or your phone and a notepad on your phone and just ask yourself 7 times. This is a known NLP, non-linguistic programming technique. 7 times, ask yourself, why? Why am I reaching out for whatever it is? Okay. You answer that. I want to feel better. Why
I don't want to feel
better?
I don't want to feel.
Why do I want to feel? Exactly. And until you get to something of substance, you don't stop.
That's excellent.
It's a
7
hard
times.
Exercise.
Yeah.
7
yeah.
times.
Why?
Or you can pay for therapy and whatever. It's up to you.
Yeah,
You
right.
can do this.
Well, we've got people doing that too, but without making specific comments to specific people in the industry, I just will say for the record, what we're doing right now is not working. It's a failing grade. If you were doing it on the school scale, right?
Yeah.
The statistics are that if you can make it to a year sober or clean, you have an 80% chance of staying sober or clean long term. If you can't make it to that year, you have less than a 15% chance to make it. Those are grim statistics. So we need the courage, the courageous action to say, I'm going to take my power back. This ball is in my hands, right? You talked about the awareness and then being open to feedback. Have those conversations and set boundaries.
And find support systems that will get you through the hard times, whether it's your sponsor, a friend, a book, a movie, a comedy. Like there are comedies that are going to distract you from whatever's going on. Comedy cures cancer. Okay. So if that's something that may work for you, find a few, create a playlist and do that. Or if that fails, always Google funny kitten video.
Yeah. Kitten videos are the best. And another one I'll add is music. I use music as a positive way to change my mood and my mind. Absolutely. If I have a hard conversation to make, I listen to songs that'll pump me up. You know what I'm saying? If I have to do chores that I don't like, I usually play like 80s songs. So I feel like I'm back in the day.
Absolutely. I have playlists for every mood. I'm a YouTube fan, but you can do that on Spotify as well or whatever your poison is. Create mood lists. And be conscious. So this brings me to the next point is information diet. Just like we talked about the people, surround yourself or remove the people who are bad influence from your life. Add people who are good influence. Change your circles. Go join some groups that are healthier and are of the same lifestyle that you're trying to lead. And information diet is so important. And I stopped watching the news during the pandemic because after every news piece, I was feeling more depressed than before. I'm like, I did not need to know how many people died today, how many hospitals are overstaffed or understaffed and overbooked. Yeah. Right. And it was just throwing me down deeper and deeper. And I'm like, I'm done. I'm not doing this. And little by little, I learned not to watch TV at all. If you want to find any specific piece of information about anything, it's always online if you really need to. Or what started happening in my life is something serious is happening, even locally, somebody's going to let me know.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest, I have several friends whose therapists suggested that they stop watching the news because it was creating so much anxiety and depression in their life, they couldn't function.
Yeah, I would even generalize it to TV in general. I do have a TV right there.
General.
You see there's no wire? It's unplugged. It's actually wrapped around the TV because what are some of the other things? Exactly. Commercials.
It's programming. They're programming you.
Then you have all these shows where you have, especially, let's say for women, it's the skinny models.
Yeah.
Right? For men, it's whatever else. So there's always that pressure, the societal pressure, the norms, the standards, the Hollywoods, right? And we automatically start lowering our own self-worth. We don't even think about it.
No.
But everybody who's watching TV, and you guys don't even realize it, it'll be probably mind-boggling to you. They use hypnosis. They are trained. They are trained to use neuro-linguistic programming, body language, hypnosis to build it into their messaging, right?
To make it more palatable.
To make it more palatable, whether that's a positive piece like an infomercial or whether it's news.
Yeah.
Right. Or whether it's shopping channel or a movie. It really, there are some movies. I don't remember who told me this. There was some Disney movie that somebody took apart and there was some imagery, subliminal imagery.
Oh, yeah.
There's
subliminal.
Scenes.
Yeah. In the 60s and 70s, they used to, in the advertisements, the ice in the glass behind the Johnny Walker Red said SEX. And it was only in class and it was advertising because that's what they're trying to do is get you into a state of reasonableness so they can put their programming into you.
Yeah.
It's subliminal advertising that works.
Yeah. And it works to this day. Unfortunately, this is the oldest trick of the trade.
And all of our clients and residents are having to deal with a society that has an addiction to alcohol. It's embedded in our culture and we won't acknowledge it. Now, does that mean that people can't drink ever? No. 90% of the population does not have a clinically diagnosable substance use disorder. But there's problem drinkers, there's binge drinkers, there's people that think that they're fine because they bring a paycheck home and they support the family. But Gabor Mate said the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection.
I love that. Actually, a very similar quote is the opposite of love is not hate, it's apathy.
Yes. If you're disconnected from yourself, how do you know what's coming into your psyche?
Yeah.
You could be being flooded with all kinds of negative
Let's take it even further. It's not just psyche. It's also your diet. What do you intake?
Yes.
It's the air. It's anything you put on your body and anything you wash your body with, anything you wash your clothes with. Did you know, this is a very old fact, and a lot of people don't talk about it anymore, that fabric softener sheets actually are carcinogenic?
Yes.
Do you know that in the average umbilical cord between a mother and a child, there are found 300 carcinogens?
I would believe it. Yeah, okay. Because from our environment.
Right. So detoxing our environment in whatever ways you are aware and learning more about it, right? Substituting for eco options or options that are less toxic. You can have water and vinegar to wash your windows. Why do you need Windex? Right? Yeah. Windex is a known carcinogen. Yeah. So just start learning about what you're using, read the labels, learn about the formaldehyde ingredients, like what are all the there's like 8 names or probably more now that mean the same thing, right? Anything that ends with a number is a toxin.
It's toxin.
Okay? So if you see a label and something on your food ends with a number, colorant number, whatever, okay, you can take a risk on ketchup, okay? Even though it should be red because it's made of tomatoes, what it does have red colorant, but how much of ketchup do you consume? A couple of teaspoons a week, that's fine, right? But something you consume a lot of, for example, your soft drinks. I don't live in the United States, but I just came back from a week-long trip, okay? And I went to multiple restaurants, hotels, and in November, I was also on a cruise that was mainly American population. It was almost impossible to find water.
Oh,
soft drinks were a lot more available and offered. Before water was ever offered. I was like, what? They're water like
because we're addicted to sugar.
Water. Just bring me water.
Because we're addicted
to sugar, to colorants.
To chemicals, to, yes, they have, yes. And I think it's so important that you mention this, because detoxing your environment after you've been through 28 days of treatment, go home and make it just as simple as rearrange your room, right? Make it different. Get rid of all of the negative, toxic things in your house and make a commitment to yourself. You've already made a commitment to get rid of the substances in your body. Now look at your environment, and that's what we're encouraging you to do today, is to start where you are and every day just do what you can to be a better human being than you were the day before.
And just to add to that, because we may not know what is toxic and what isn't, monitor your mood, monitor your behavior. I heard somewhere that they did a study with the kids who had cold cut sandwiches for lunch, and a percentage of kids from that school that were depressed, that were suffering with depression. And then they switched the school's lunches to basically produce, non-processed produce. That problem basically disappeared.
Yeah.
Basically. And I started noticing, after being aware, again, awareness, after being aware of that fact, I noticed that if I were ever at somebody's house and we were having a cold cut platter and cheese and some simple carbs, like maybe croissants or something fancy, right? Oh my goodness. The next day I was miserable for no reason. I'm like, why is everything frustrating me? So the chemical imbalance that comes in from toxins, from food in our environment, may make us angry, frustrated. And again, what is it going to trigger? Addictions. Right? So even though it may seem not so related, but because it makes us into who we're not, it is like it finds control.
It makes
over
us
our
into
bodies.
who we're not. You're absolutely right. And nobody wakes up and says, I want to be an addict today. So these are the things that we can do. We can use healthy coping mechanisms. We can reach for things that we know are going to further our personal development. It's always like the ABCs of recovery that we talk about here at the Lodge. Accept your situation and take action. Number 2 is be brave enough to start over and over until you achieve your desired result. And 3 is create a stellar support system around yourself. That's a good start. Well, Julz, I want to ask you, I ask everybody this last question as we're nearing the end of our time here. If you could go back before you found that book and you could talk to yourself about the determination and strength that it was going to take to get through, what do you think you would give the advice to your younger self?
I think self-love is something that would apply to anybody at any time, in any circumstance. If I started working on accepting myself, feeling worthy, I would be a different person. I think the guilt, the inability to look at yourself in the mirror, the inability to look at your pictures and going, oh my goodness, she's ugly, or this is big, or this is small, whatever, right? Pointing out your imperfections, always. It's a matter of focus. Do you focus on the good, or do you focus on the bad? Are you the victim, or are you looking for the good in the situation, for the opportunity? So it's the mindset shift, a tiny mindset shift, to always look at the positive. And I know that the word is overused. People are like, oh, be positive. Nah. But it literally is like, can I just do that shift every time I'm frustrated? Can I find something in that situation, first of all, to be grateful for? Gratitude is universal, right? And another super cool trick that I learned in the last year from Abraham Hicks' books is when something happens and you don't like it, instead of fighting it, instead of going, I don't like to hate this, because that's going to focus more on this and it's just going to explode. You need to remember this phrase. Instead, I prefer this. Okay? Somebody cuts you off when you're driving. Instead, I prefer courteous drivers and a free highway. Okay? Just keep saying that. Keep saying that. Okay? If, let's say, you have pain in whatever organ, right? When that pain comes on, I prefer to be healthy and full of vitality and full of energy. Absolutely. And just focus on that and repeat it. It is such a valuable trick. It is very helpful in relationships, especially with people who you cannot escape, that live with you, or your spouse or your kids, right? When they do things and you're like, oh, you just did this to me. Okay. I prefer that my kids clean up their room. And sometimes I say it out loud. Yeah. I learned to say it out loud to the kids. Yep. I prefer that my kids, or prefer that you clean up your room. I love the kids who clean up their room, right? Or I love the spouse who brings me flowers. Why don't you ever bring me flowers? Right. Who wants to come home to that? Right. So if you remember this tiny little mindset shift, and you can really apply it to anything. Instead, I prefer. Use it like mantra. It's also one of the principles of intentional living. You're setting an intention for the future, and through law of attraction and just the way vibration works and frequencies, you start attracting what you think most about. So if you take your focus off what you don't like and put in what you prefer, that stuff is little by little, you won't recognize
it's going to materialize. And that's exactly what we see in our population. Thank you so much, Julz, for coming on today. You've really opened up my eyes and have some nuggets of wisdom to share with our audience. I know that this is going to reach and help a lot of people. So thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure.
We will see you on the flip side. Thank you for tuning in to Recovery Comes Home Radio. We hope that today's episode has provided you with valuable information and insights on the recovery process. Remember, you are not alone on this journey. Keep seeking support, practicing self-care, and moving forward one step at a time. Until next time, stay strong, stay resilient, and stay humble. Hope lives here.